for setup today, you've got a Universal 3D project. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use the Cinti Starter Pack, which is free. And then we're also going to use the third-person controller with it. So let's see, what I can do here is, does anybody need the URL for the asset store? If you go to the asset store, you can probably find this, but what I'll do to make it easier on you is I'll paste it in the Discord if you happen to have the Discord open. So, and of course you'll need to be logged in order to download it, but once you do, you can add it to your assets and then bring it into your project. So actually, I need to do the same thing because I'm starting like you from scratch. All right, so now if you start with Cinti and you open it up in Unity, it's going to open up the package manager here. And here you'll see it should open automatically to this, and you will download it. Or if you were like me, you've had it before, it may ask you to update. But then once you do, you import it. You're going to need everything that's in here. So go ahead and just hit the import button with everything checked. It has a demo scene that's going to be where we're going to be working, which is a little busy, but it's kind of fun too. So when you have it downloaded, you should have in your project under Assets, Polygon Starter. So then go back to, let's see, I will go to the next slide, which is the third-person character controller. And I'll also share that in the Discord. And so we've worked with the first-person character controller before. I think we might have worked with the third person. This one, when you import it, you may need to install some additional packages. So don't worry about that. Should be pretty straightforward. So let's see, I import it to project. And here, yeah, it says it has dependencies. And so you go ahead and say install upgrade. So it'll require you to install the dependencies first, and then you'll be able to bring all the content in. It's probably going to restart the editor along the way, so don't be surprised if that happens. And when the editor starts back up is when you'll see the import window with all of the content. But this will give us everything we need to work on animations in this scene. And it gives us a third-person character to walk around in the scene. And actually, in the last class on programming, we didn't manage to get to the part at the end about setting up triggers. And I told you I would create a video for you for that. But it turns out that I was like, well, wait a minute. The animation class actually does that. We're actually going to set up a door with a trigger. You step into it, and it'll open. So you're going to get that. Oh, I should have warned you. I should have let you know.
I was trying with ChatGPT, and I was like, I opened YouTube and it took me like 1 minute to find out.
Well, repetition is great. And actually, hopefully you didn't learn any bad habits. But I guess we're going to find out. So once you've imported that starter assets third-person controller, you should have this folder under assets, and we will set it up. But the first thing we want to do is we want to go into the Polygon Starter folder and go to Scenes, and there's this demo scene. And so this demo scene is already set up, although it's got the dreaded fuchsia material, which just means it's using a previous render engine render materials. But we know there's an easy way to fix this. We've done this a couple times already. So as a reminder, window rendering render pipeline converter. So we're going to go built in to URP. So it's using old material setup. So we can just go ahead and click everything here. There's no animation clips to convert, but if we initialize and convert, it might ask us to save. That's totally cool. So this is very common when you're using older assets in Unity 6 because Universal Render Pipeline is the default in Unity 6. Absolutely. So just as soon as it gets finished, because I don't think it's going to let me do anything, but it's under Window, Rendering, Render Pipeline Converter. And it looks like this. And so when you're done, it will take a moment where it turns like a lovely blue color, but then your scene will wind up looking correct. So knowing it will take some people time to make this happen. We all have different computers of different power levels. And so while you're waiting, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a little bit of background on how animations work, or just talk a little bit about animation in general. Animation is used in a lot of different places in gameplay. Chances are when you think of animation, you're thinking of character animation, right? Like the player character actually has probably some of the most complex animations. But we use animation all over the place just to draw attention to things. Movement is a really good way to do so. So you might have like collectible coins that animate. You might have a door that animates. And you may need to switch between different types of animations. A lot of times a lot of times you'll even create animations in a program outside of Unity and bring them in. So you can create animations in Blender or Maya and import them. But what we're going to do today is actually animate inside of Unity to just add simple animations to things. So in gameplay, the thing is, it's very different how games uses animations compared to movies and film. Like if you use animation in a film, a lot of times you can just make the entire thing animate just the way you like it. You've got a single animation with all the little adjustments. In games, you take an animation and you chop it up because you need, a game is interactive. The player can do something different at any time. So for the player character, I can't just have an animation where he runs and jumps and lands and slides, because I don't know if the player's going to do that. So I'll literally chop animations up into tiny little pieces. And we have something called an animation state machine and blending between animations that let us make something seem like it's seamless. Like if you play Assassin's Creed and your assassin is doing all these crazy things on a rooftop, but it's in response to your controls and it seems to flow relatively smoothly. And that's because of the amount of effort that goes into making animations chopped up and blended together. So there's a bunch of stuff here that I'm not going to go into. But the point is that there's lots of useful ways that you can apply animation to small tasks in the way that we're going to do in the editor. So for example, doors, having a door open when you step into a trigger or close when you leave. You can animate lights, like a traffic light changing from green to red. So you can animate more than just position, rotation, and scale. You can animate color, emissiveness, or glow. You can you can even animate properties of a script. It's really powerful what you can do, and we'll show you some of this. But the things that you want to draw attention to, like power-ups, pickups, and items, you can animate those. You can animate vehicles to make a city feel alive. Or you might combine things like a cuckoo clock, where you have doors open, something shoots out, makes a sound. You can use an animation timeline to trigger events, sound, visual effects, stuff like that. It's really powerful. And so, yeah, we converted stuff, and now this is where we're at. We've got the scene that we can work with. And so, but what we need to do next is we need to set up our third-person character. Because we've got a scene, but we want to be able to walk around, and we want the player to be able to trigger things. So here in your demo scene, you want to be able to see in your project and go to Starter Assets, and then go into Third-Person Controller. So in that folder, you have a prefabs folder. Double-click on it. And these are, it's a little hard to understand by looking at it. You'd probably be pretty confused if you just downloaded this. But what we need is Nested Parent Armature Unpack. Now, the name suggests we're going to need to unpack it. This is actually our player character. And those other things, those other prefabs are pieces of it. But so what we want to do, and we actually did this with the first person controller. We even had to fix it up and move things around. We're not going to have to do that here. But what we do need to do, we need to right click on it, go to prefab, and do unpack. Just regular unpack, not completely. And then what that does is, now we're ready to, we can rename this parent player. So now things are making a little bit more sense. So, but there's a couple things we don't need here, just like with the first person version, that we can get rid of to simplify. The two things that start with UI, we can actually just delete, because those are for mobile and they would show the controls up on the screen. So what we have is we have our player. We can even take a look at it and say, okay, cool, we've got this kind of mannequin looking thing. That's our parent when we select it, and it has the main camera that follows him. We have the controls for that camera, and we have the character himself. That's called player armature. And of course, this is a good time to first save, but then, when you dropped it in here, chances are it should have wound up in the scene in a reasonable place. But just double check that, because the first thing we want to do before getting into animating is make sure that this actually works. So let's press play. And in your game window down here, this isn't quite working. Although what's interesting is you can see if I move my mouse, I do have control over this, and I can even move it around. But if you look at the game window, the camera's not where the character is. Anybody have an idea why this might be happening? What the problem could be here? You're right, Yajit. So I need to, what I didn't do is remove the existing main camera that was already in the scene. And so we've got two cameras. We've got a main camera that came with the demo scene, and our player has a camera. We don't need this main camera here. So let's delete that. Now our game window even updates and looks like what we're expecting. It looks oddly low res. Oh, it's probably the scale, but so now let's try to save and run it again and see if that fixes our issue. So now I can look around. I may need to actually click in this window to make sure that I can move. Yeah. All right, so now I've got my oddly fuzzy and blocky looking. I wonder why that looks like that. I will figure it out at one point. But now you can see we can move around in this area. So I picked this in part because it's got these coins. We can animate them because they look collectible and we'd want to draw attention to them. I also have this door over here, which I can walk through. But being able to have that start out close and open when we step into a trigger is useful. There's also this giant question mark here that we're going to animate the color of it to draw attention to it as well, to demonstrate that you can animate more than just position, rotation, and scale. You can also rotate animate other properties. Yes, Bastian.
I'm amazed that you picked the door. Doors are every game designer's games. Yeah. You can actually find it on the internet if you Google doors.
Precisely. Doors are notorious for being a pain. It's always the things you least expect, right? You know what else sucks? Ladders. Man, I put a ladder into my game and I really kind of regret it because they're kind of a pain in the ass. All right.
Doors, is it worth
Yeah, really. Do you really need a door? It also creates game design problems like the classic combat space. I have a door, but the player won't go in it. They stand in the door and shoot things from the door. Multiple issues. But okay, so what we're going to do is like look around in your scene and find one of these coins. There's actually a lot of these coins in the scene. You can see they're already placed there, and they are blue here in the hierarchy, and that means that they're a prefab. And so we know if we make sure that we edit the prefab of the coin, any changes we make will be applied to all the coins. So rather than having to add an animation to every coin instance, instead, when we select a coin from the inspector over here, you can click select, and what it'll do is it'll show you where that coin exists in the project. So if and you could do this, if you lose it, it does fade away after a second. You can just click it in the scene again, click select, and when you see the one that is selected in the project window, double click it. So now our scene changes to where we're editing the prefab. So the prefab is the blueprint. It's the thing that everything else is based on. So when we edit the prefab, all of those instances will change. So we want to be working with the prefab. And now the next thing we're going to need is we're going to need it to get the animation window open. There's a specific window for working with animation. So if you go to Window, Animation, Animation. And for me, it opened up over here off to the side. So I'm going to bring it over here. And I'm going to dock it down here at the bottom, because I want to be able to see both the scene view here and the hierarchy, but I also want to be able to see the animation window down here at the bottom. So I'm going to move things around a little bit and hide my console back here. So what you want is to be able to see, I could even scoot this over here a little bit. So you should see that you've got a blue background to your scene because you're in prefab editing mode. You've got your coin selected. Since the animation window is open and we have the coin selected, you should see the text to begin animating the coin, create an animator and an animation clip. And you can do that quite easily just by pressing this button, create. When you do, it's going to open up a way to put the new animation somewhere. It by default is in prefabs, but that's not really a great organization. Let's go up to Assets. Let's right click and create a new folder and call it Animations, because that's a much better place to put these animations. You could create this folder later and move things over. Like Unity's really good about that. Funny story, Snowdrop engine that we used on Avatar is not good about moving files around. You're like, wait a minute, why is this so problematic in this like AAA game engine? And it works just fine. Oh God, don't ever rename something. All right, so let's give this animation a reasonable name. It's going to be it's specific to the thing that we're doing. Not only so, if we name it coin spin, because what we want to do is we want to make the coin rotate. And you see this in a lot of games. Something that you can collect generally will have an animation or like something that's drawing attention to it. So we named the animation coin spin and click save. So now, if you look at the animation window, it says coin spin right here in this specific place. So this shows you, you could have multiple animations on the coin and you could change them from here. You could create a new one from here. But this helps you know, all right, we're working with the animation coin spin. Now, we have a timeline here that's going to let us make changes over time. And this button allows us to decide, well, what are we animating? It has to be something on the coin. And remember, in Unity, in the inspector, you see the different components that are on this object. So the things that are here on this object are going to also show up as things that we can animate. So I have a transform component. I can animate the position, rotation, or scale. I have a mesh collider. I have a mesh filter and a mesh renderer. So that's already hinting that I can actually animate things like the material's base color, which we're going to do a little later. But first, we want to make this coin rotate. So we'll open the transform property. we'll click on rotation, and then we'll click the plus button over here. And that will add this property to this list of things that we're animating on this timeline. And so now, if we open it, we'll see that we can, when it comes to the rotation, we can rotate the x-axis, the y-axis, or the z-axis, or any combination. So, and also the thing that it did automatically is it automatically placed a keyframe at the beginning and a keyframe at 1 second for each of these three properties. So a keyframe is essentially a value for that thing that you're animating at that time. So, but it's already, so this keyframe for, we're going to rotate on the y-axis, the one that goes up and down, because we kind of want it to just spin like most games do, like Mario. I mean, Mario is always a great example, right? So we'll see that the keyframe here is these keyframes are at 0, 0, 0. These are also at 0, 0, 0. You see, I can click on a keyframe and make it turn blue. And it's important to be on a keyframe and making the change on that keyframe. It's really easy for you to actually not be on the keyframe, not have it selected, and be making changes to this, and it's not actually affecting the keyframe you need. So it's a very common mistake to make. But essentially, so we actually have some controls up here. Play, go to next keyframe is a way to make sure that we go precisely to another keyframe. So you can, move, the timeline in the play point on the timeline, and you can click on things, but if you want to be precise, which it can be helpful, you can use these buttons here to jump from the keyframe at the beginning to the next keyframe, which if you had many keyframes, and sometimes you might, that can be super useful. So basically, if we want this thing to spin around one entire 360-degree rotation in 1 second, then we would go here, and for rotation Y, we type in 360. Now, you might think that just hitting enter now is going to be fine, but actually it doesn't really, I think that it doesn't update that quite properly. I think it does actually. Sometimes you need to hit the add keyframe to make it really stick. So make sure that if you think you've edited a keyframe and changed the value, make sure that it's what you think. Now what you can do here is, so okay, my first keyframe is at 0. My next keyframe is at 360. If I press play now, I should actually see it rotating. And let me see, I'm going to switch to this thing and make it just a little bit less busy. Because I'm going to ask you a question, like, okay, as the animation director on the project, do you think this looks like a nice, smooth 360-degree rotation? No. Correct. Now, something is wrong with this. Okay, can you get a sense for, like, well, why does it not look like a smooth 360-degree rotation? What's wrong? There's a hesitation right there at the very end, right? Like it almost seems like a pause for a moment. Well, this is because Unity by default applies what's called ease in and ease out into these keyframes. But we can fix this. If you click on the keyframe so that it's blue, and then right click, the tangents are the things that control what's going into the keyframe and what's going out. If we set both tangents to be linear, that means that there won't be any of this like ramping up and ramping down as it goes through these. And if we do that to both of these, select this last one as well, both tangents linear. Now when we play, we get the desired effect. Nice, smooth movement. You use both. So when you click on the keyframe, do both tangents linear. Absolutely. And so that's how you make sure, that's one of the gotchas, is that it'll automatically add this easing in. And you can play around with these properties and see how they affect the animation. But this, in order to get this smooth movement, we needed to set those to linear so that there's no ramp. Now, if you wanted to rotate the opposite direction, you're like, this is great, but I don't want it to rotate clockwise. I want it to rotate counterclockwise. You could go to this keyframe and you could put a negative in front of this. So instead of 360, you could do negative 360. And then it should rotate the opposite direction. Now, if we want to see this in our scene, we don't even need to leave prefab mode here. At this point, if we just press play and and the game view will pop forward, we'll be here where we can walk around, we can see that all of the coins in the scene are now rotating. So there's some over there, up there on the top. Scale's at 1.5, that's why it looks all cruddy. And then if I hit Control P or come out, now for my tastes, they're moving a little fast. Like that feels a bit agitated. And so if I want to slow this down, what I actually need is instead of for it to rotate once every second, I'm thinking once every 2 seconds. Like I think that will slow it down. Now, by default, Unity has given me 1 second to work with, but if I put my cursor over the timeline and I use the mouse scroll wheel, I can actually kind of, actually, no, I need to be here in the middle. I can use the mouse scroll wheel to get more space that I can see and work with, and I can drag this thing as practice. But you'll see that like, oh, there's a keyframe up here that represents like selecting all of them. And as you're moving it, you can actually see precisely where you're at. And that could be useful because sometimes it's kind of hard to eyeball it, but I'm like, okay, I want this to be at exactly 2 seconds. So now I've got the same animation, but now it's at 2 seconds. And I'm moving much more slowly, which is kind of what I want. So again, let's play and take a look at this. So now when I see it, that's reasonable. Doesn't look too agitated, doesn't look like it's trying to grab too much attention, but it's just enough for the player to pick it out of the environment. Color and movement are some of your best friends when trying to make something pop out from the environment. So anybody have any questions about animating, simple animation with the coin? Oh, like accelerate up to something? Well, the question is, would you want it to, because since it's going to loop, you could have it start out slow and accelerate, but then it's going to loop back around. Now, you can tell an animation not to loop, but then it'll only play once. You could have it accelerate up to a point and then come back down. Is that what you're looking for, Yeji? So, for example, let's see. So now it has a constant speed, but if I wanted to have it start out here and from the right tangent, I think that it's actually, tell you what, let me research that to give it, because I want to make sure that we get the opportunity to do both the trigger for the door and for the material. And we're at 6:45, so let me get something for you for having something accelerate. But essentially, one of the things you could do is essentially add more keyframes. And you could space them out differently. So, for example, so we know that. Let's see. I think I got. If I were to say, okay, the first keyframe starts at 0, and then the next keyframe goes to like 90. And so we could say, okay, it takes maybe 30 seconds to get from 0 to 90. actually, let me see. This goes to 0, and then this is 90. It's really easy to get scrambled, so you always want to kind of check your work. So I go to from 0 to 90 in 30 seconds. So then if I wanted to go even, if I wanted to go to 180, but then halve the amount of time, I would go to 45 and make it go to 180 at this point. Actually, I'm still editing this one because it's blue. Let's see. So this is 90. There's actually an easier way to do this. Here, let me show you this real quick. So one thing you can do if you want to make changes and have it automatically record things, that's what this record button is for. So now let's see. If I were to, for example, delete this, and I were to say, okay, I want to start from 0. And then, actually, did I not delete that? 0. I know this. Yeah, because I changed it. Yeah, exactly. So that it's really easy to get scrambled doing animation. So let's see. I started at 0. And then what I'll do is I'll hit record. I'll move out to 30. And then I'll hit 90. And then I'll go to 45. And I'll hit 180. And then I'll go like maybe just like a little bit further, and I'll do 360. So this should give us, and then I'll turn this off so I don't accidentally create new keyframes. So I'm starting from 0. It takes me 30 seconds to get up to 90, but then it takes me 15 seconds to get to 180, and then it takes me just like 10 seconds to get to 360. So that should actually feel like acceleration. So like this. But then if you're like, okay, well, I have the keyframes I want, but I want to adjust them, massage them, get this a little better. You can grab these and move them around now that you have the values and say like, okay, I understand in general what I want, but I want to give the whole thing more time. That's one of the nice things about animation is once you get the keyframes in, adjusting them, and kind of a thing that works really well with animation too is when you want to coordinate and synchronize and create changes of multiple things, and you can even have an event that fires from the animation at a specific point to do things like apply damage at a specific point. So this could be really useful if you can imagine this as like a character punching. And you say, okay, in the beginning they kind of wind up, and then they start punching, and then there's the point at which they actually are touching their target, and then they follow through, and then they bring it back. Now, you might want to apply the damage to the target, have a sound effect play that's like, ugh, and then play some visual effects that's like, puh. And you could trigger that precisely at this moment by having an event here that does it. And so if you need something that really choreographs a sequence of events in perfect timing with each other, consider using an animation timeline to do it. And you can put in events here that will trigger a specific function in the script. And so you can, even things that aren't available on a given game object, you can still synchronize them with other things using events that trigger scripts, which is a bit of an advanced thing that I'll probably show the intermediate class. But for now, let's say we've got our coin animation, which mine now accelerates, which is cool. So let's go, and we're going to do the next thing, which let's take a look at this this door over here.
I can do that. I gotta sneak out.
No
It was
worries.
great meeting you all. Have fun and do cool projects.
Yeah, and thank you, Bastian,
Yeah,
once
sure.
again. All right, so let's locate this door here. So I believe it's the only door in the scene, so you should be in a pretty good position. Do you need some help getting out?
I thought I'd take my jacket.
Oh, that would probably be smart.
Cheers.
Later.
Bye.
So the first thing we want to do with this door is that we want it to start from a closed position. So like you can either, if you zero out the rotation, you're like, oh, it's still 90 degrees open. Like, find the point at which, I think it's negative 90, is where the door is closed. Or if you just want to eyeball it, you can also just use the rotation. But note this, you can't use the rotation gizmo unless this thing is set to, let's see. There is a setting here that we need to make sure is set for this to work properly, which is not a bad idea to go ahead and get it where we want it. Let's see. It is, where is the, aha, the second one, tool settings. So you see this is set to center, which means it's rotating from the center of this thing. But this door has actually been set up already correctly to have a pivot point on the side where you'd expect it to rotate from. So if instead of having this thing rotate from the center, if we change it to pivot, now when it rotates from the hinge that you'd expect. So I found that because I went to, your master toolbar of toolbars. The second thing is called tool settings. And you're going to probably want this set up because once we have the door shut, we'll probably want to open it to something that feels like correct. So yeah, that is under tool settings is where that pivot change is, from center to pivot. There's so many toolbars in Unity 6 now. So once you've got your door closed and you've got things set up correctly so you can rotate it as you want to, and it's going to rotate like a door, this time we're actually going to create the animation without going into prefab mode because it can be useful to see it here in context in the place it is, and we can do this. So with it selected, you see in the animation window it says to begin animating the door, create an animation clip. So we'll do that. And we'll go to, again, we'll want to be in the animation folder, in assets animations. And we could name this like door open.
This will only animate the instance of the.
Yes, correct. And in this case, that's fine. That's what we want. If we had other doors, we could actually, so once I create this, what you can do is when you're editing an instance, it becomes an override, and any changes you make, if you want it to apply to the prefab, you can click apply all, and then it'll apply to everything. In this case, there's only one of them, so it's no big deal, but very good point. All right, so now in our animation window, we have the door open animation. And again, we're going to choose add property, open transform, click rotation, and click plus. And guess what? We're going to be doing pretty much the same thing. We're going to animate the door. Of course, the door we don't want to continuously spin. But you'll note that because the door starts out at a -90 rotation, that's what the first keyframe is set up as. It's also what the last keyframe setup is. So yeah, we want to go to the last keyframe. We know that like our play head, this line here needs to be on that, and we need to select it. So now we can open the door here and get it to where we want to. This is the thing that I was thinking of previously. You'll note that when I rotate this door, that even though we've got the keyframe selected, we don't see it change here. We do when we let go of it. That's weird. But I can press add keyframe there to make sure that that keyframe gets that value. So now if I scrub on the timeline here, I should see the door open. And in fact, I can play it and we'll see it loop and snap back to its original position. So of course we don't want our door to continuously open, but we can fix that looping aspect. But the most important thing is that, you know, regardless of the looping, it opens up the way we want it to. Now, something that you might not have noticed when we were doing this is that over here in the inspector, if we collapse some of these other components, we got a new component that was added that wasn't there before. It's called an animator component, not to be confused with animation. You know, we have an animation clip, which we just created. This animator is the component that goes on there, and it actually just not only did it automatically create, not only did it automatically add this component, it also automatically created something called an animation controller, which is this thing. And it put it in the same folder as our animation. So if you look closely, we have the coin spin and door open animation, but each one of those also created a animator, one for the door and one for the coin. Now, if we double click the one for the door, it's going to open it up in the animator window. Again, maybe confusing that you've got a window called animation and a window called animator. So I mentioned before that you can, in video games, you'll very often have multiple animations, and you'll use something called an animation state machine to switch between them and blend between them. That's what this is. You can use your middle mouse button to grab and move this around, and even to zoom in and zoom out. And so what happened, and this happened on the coin too, we weren't even paying attention, but what happens is these things, these entities, these nodes are states, animation states. And what happens automatically when we create a new animation clip and put it on a game object is from the entry state, which is almost like the start function in a script. When the game starts, when the scene starts, it automatically transitions to this state, which it named the same as the animation clip. It named it door open. So that happens automatically, but then you can create other states, and then you can set up transitions from one state to another based on something happening. So I'm going to undo that real quick. And so we have this door open animation state that plays the door open animation. Now the thing is, we don't want the door to immediately open when the game starts. We want the door to be in the closed state, which is often referred to as like the idle state. If you had a character, the character would start out in their idle state, which is probably just like standing there bopping like this. And then the player pushes forward and goes to the run state, and they start running. Then you let go, and they go back into the idle state. Classic 2D platformer kind of stuff. So what we want to do is we actually want to create a new state that's the idle state. So if we right-click here, we click Create State Empty, we get this thing that says New State. We can click it and drag it around. And then the name is up here. Let's call this Door Idle. You could also call it Door Closed if you want. Better to call it Door Idle, and I'll show you why in a second. But what we want is when the game starts, instead of going to the door open state, we want it to go to the door idle state, which will be the closed state. And the way you do that is you right-click on entry, you right-click on door idle, and you do set as layer default state. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set up some of this logic for how the door will open based on walking into the trigger. So what we'll do is, when the door idle, we want the door idle to change to the door open state, which will play the door open animation. And we do that by creating a transition. We click on door idle and right click, we click Make Transition, and we get this white line that follows the cursor. And then we click on Door Open, and now we have this line with an arrow pointing in the direction of the transition. So we're going to need a way for the game to, essentially for a script to tell the animator transition from door idle to door open, and it'll play that animation. And the way we do this is by adding a parameter that we're going to change. By default over here, this is on layers, but you can switch it to parameters here. And there's no parameters currently. So what we're going to do, we can add a parameter by clicking this, and you can see our parameter types can be a float, an int, a bool, or a trigger. The first three we've heard of before from our programming class. These are types of numbers. Float is a decimal number, int is whole numbers, and a bool is a true or false Boolean statement. And so we'll use bool. Trigger is actually a special thing that's used for animations if you want something to occur but then reset itself. But in this case, we actually want the trigger that we're going to create to tell the door to open or close, and we'll have that driven by a bool. So create a bool parameter, and we're actually going to name this open door. We name it a verb, something we want to do. So if open door becomes set to true, then we'll have it transition from the door being closed to the door being open. So now that we have this parameter here, the way that we hook it up to this transition is to first click on the transition, and you'll see over here, now in the inspector, this transition is turned blue, and here's the conditions. I can even pull this preview down to get out of the way, but it says conditions, list is empty. So we'll add a condition for what will cause this transition to occur. If we click the plus, it automatically fills in open door true. So if we had multiple parameters, they'd be in this dropdown. And because it's a bool, you can choose either true or false. But this is what we want. We want, when we're at the door idle state, if the open door parameter gets set to true, which would be like that, then it will transition from door idle to door open, and it would open up. And so one other thing that we can do here is there's this thing that's called, it says has exit time. Now this is something that's really easy to also not pay attention to and not realize how it works. But what it means is if something has an exit time, I think it's because I haven't set up this. If something has an exit time, it means it's going to wait for the animation that's currently playing to finish before it starts. And we don't want that. We want this change to occur the moment that this parameter gets changed. And the way we make sure that happens is by unchecking this. So generally, if you want something to immediately occur, make sure you don't have exit time set. Let's see. And so we have door open, and that's already set to our door open animation. So the thing that we're missing here is that there's no animation for door idle. But that's easy enough to create. And in fact, I'm not even sure that I think we may not even need it, to be honest. Let's see, let's look at one thing we can do. It's really easy to test these things, which is if we take our animator window and pull it off so that it's no longer there, and we put it off to the side here. We want to be able to see our scene that has our door and see our animator where we can see both the parameter and the states. And I think that it may be, so what we can do now, which is really cool, is that if we're playing the game, when the game starts playing, I think we may need to create an empty, basically an animation that doesn't do anything for door idle. But let's see if this actually will work the way I think it might. So if I click this open door, it actually triggers it to make the state change. So this is a way I can preview what's going to happen. So I don't even have to hook it up to a script that's going to change this value, which is what we're going to do eventually. All right, so now the thing that we want to do is like, okay, well, we've got a door that can open when we trigger it to do so using this Boolean value, but we want to immediately, like, let's fix this looping thing, because that's probably the biggest issue we seem to have right now. And that loop is actually a setting on the animation itself. If we click this, it'll show us the animation. We want to find the door open animation in Assets Animations and click it here in the project window. And when we have it clicked in the project window, in the inspector, you can see loop time has a check for true. So that's all we have to do to keep it from looping. So now, if we start our game again, if we have our, well, first, let's set open door to false from start. It should default to false. Should be set to false by default. So it's not, the door's closed. We set it to true, it opens. If we set it back to false, it doesn't go back to being closed. So that's something that we can set up. And we can actually do that by reusing our door open animation. I just have to so essentially from door open, we want to be able to then go to door closed, or even transition back to, let's see. I think that what we want to do is we want to go from door open to door closed. We want to play an animation of the door closing, which actually we can just do by having the door open animation play backwards. A little tricky. But essentially, let's create a new state and name it door close. And so from the door open state, we want to be able to go to the door closed state. So the way that we do this is make transition from door open to door closed. I think I actually did this differently when I set it up before, but let's see. So the transition, again, we don't want it to have an exit time, and we want the condition to be open door set to false. So from the door open state, it'll go, if door open is set to false, it'll go to door close. Now, this is a little dangerous because if it goes to door close, we're like, well, then it'll close and it'll never open again because there's no transition. We want to be able to transition from door close back to door open. And it's pretty easy to do this. Let's create a transition that goes the other way, select it, and give it open door true. So now we've created a loop where we can, we enter the game. If door open set to true, we go to door open. If it's set to false, we close it. True, open, false, close. So now we've got a loop that's useful. Now to play, now for door close, as I mentioned, we can just use our door open animation, but what we do is we set the speed to -1, if I'm not mistaken. And we will be able to see in a moment if I'm right or not. But I believe a speed of -1 will actually play an animation clip backwards. So we could create a door close animation, but in this case, since we're just doing the opposite of open, let's see if we can take a shortcut and have our door open animation play at negative speed. So now, so we start with open door is set to false, and then we play. You mean, yeah, that's if I did this here, you mean, you see these things? That's what I was missing. Thank you for that, Linnea. Because yeah, if you have it selected when it makes the transit, you see And that's exactly what I was looking for, which is that, yeah, if you have it selected in the scene, you'll see the state that it's in and you'll see that it's playing that state. So now when I switch door open, I see that it moved here and it played it and stopped. It's not looping. Now, if I press this to false, it goes to door close. Open, close, open, close. And there's no delay because we unchecked has exit time. So now we've got our animation and we got our animation state machine set up correctly. And we have a variable that we know that we can set in order to cause it to happen. But what we need to set up now is a trigger that will make this happen rather than having us stand here and click this thing, which is totally not a viable way to ship this game. So now we can move this animator window out of the way, for example, behind the scene view, because we're going to want to work in the scene a little bit. And what we do is if we go up here and we close this, so that we want to be able to see in our hierarchy a little bit more, because we're going to create an empty game object that we're going to put a box collider on, and that will be our trigger. So what we do first is right click and click create empty. And I'm going to name this door trigger. And because of where I'm looking in my viewport, it actually created it kind of right in front of my viewport's camera. No, it's actually, if you right click, it's create empty. Yep. You could technically create a cube and then like hide it by turning off the mesh renderer, but really what we can do is we'll just have this empty game object, which all it has is a transform, and it's floating in space here kind of in front of where I created it. And so on our door trigger in the inspector, it only has a transform. We'll add a box collider. If we type box, make sure you choose the regular one, not the 2D one. And so if you open box collider, the very first thing we want to do is check is trigger, because otherwise the player will just collide with it. We want it to be a trigger that when the player enters it, it causes something to happen. Now it's invisible here until you click edit collider. And then you'll see, if you have it selected, now you can see that this is like a cube that's floating in space. Well, let's first switch to the transform so that let's, I hit W, or you can click, let's see, you can click the move tool here, but get the move tool on your door trigger, and let's move it to where it's kind of positioned in front of, wow, that is totally not a great place to put that, Brian. Yeah. It is. So yeah, if you do right click here and click create empty, and then you're going to add component and put a box collider on it. Now, because it's invisible, it's going to be a little tricky to make sure you're in the right place. So what I recommend is that you bring up this orientation gizmo, which makes this thing here. If you click where it says persp, it will switch to isometric. Now I can kind of pan around, and if I click the Y, it'll give me a directly top-down view. And it'll make it a little easier for me to say, okay, from a top-down view, that's where the door is. And then if I click either, like this here, I'll be looking from the side and I can see how I'm below the ground. That's not terribly useful. So it's a bit, when you're positioning something in 3D space, it can be really useful to work in an isometric view and to snap to the top-down view, front view, or the left view, side view, and rotate around it until you see that you have your trigger placed pretty much on the doorstep here. And so now when we click edit collider and we see this box here, What we want to do is we want to give a bit of extra space for the player to approach it. We want the door to open before the player is standing right on top of it. So if we give it a little bit of extra room on the sides by pulling these dots out, give it a little extra room in the front, and make it roughly player height, which is mainly just to help us see it. So if we have something like that, that would be a good trigger because the door needs it. We know that the moment the player's collider touches this trigger, it will cause the door to open. And we want the door to open before the player gets right in front of it, or that the door will smack the player in the face. And that's not such a great experience. All right, so now we're ready to create the script that's going to change that variable in the animator. And so if we look in assets, we see that we don't have a folder for scripts yet. If we right click on assets and do create folder and name it scripts, you can also click here. So if we have a scripts folder, now if we right click and do create mono behavior script and name it door trigger. So once we've created it, if you hit enter or double click it, it'll open up that in Visual Studio. So one of the things that we're going to need in order to set that variable that is on that animator is a reference to it. And so we do, if we want to get a reference and set it up in the editor, we do public animator and then call it like door animator, semicolon. So because it's public, we'll be able to drag the animator into that, that field, and then we'll be able to reference it. Now we don't need start or update, so we can just remove those. What we do need is on trigger enter. So if I start typing on trigger, I see it already has on trigger enter. If I hit tab, then it will go ahead and give me. So this is the code that allows us to automatically detect when a trigger has been touched. So now I'm going to work a little bit from memory here, but I know that I'm going to use door animator, the animator, and then I'm going to do set bool. Our variable type is a bool. So if I start typing set, I see the different things I can set, tab. And so when I hit parentheses, I see that it needs, one of the ways you can do it is with an integer ID, but the other is the name as a string. I'm like, that's much easier for me. So I want to set this, the parameter open door, and I want to set it to true. And then if I hit tab, I can add the semicolon at the end. So there's very little code here, relatively speaking. So now when you go back to Unity, the thing is we've created this script, but we haven't put it on our door trigger game object yet. So we need to drag the script onto, let's see, is it onto door trigger? And then, yeah. And so now we need a reference to the animator on the door. So let's see. That can be a little tricky. Let's see. Oh, I know how I did this before, I think. I didn't do it on a separate object, but I think I can still do this. Let's see. So, for door animator, it can be tricky to get something like I want to get the door, I want to get the door animator component and drag it on there. But actually, this is a case where it's going to be much easier because we have very few animators in the scene, but we have a lot of objects. If you click this here, and then we do the second one is SM BLD door 01. So that is actually the animator that is on this door. So in this case, it's easier, rather than trying to drag and drop from an object in the hierarchy, it's easier for us to just kind of browse to it. If you have any trouble finding it, you could just type door. So that's the animator that we're looking for. So now your door trigger, which has your box collider on it, and your door trigger script, in the door animator field, should have SMBLD door 01. So now let's give this a shot. So in the game window, if I walk over to the door, when I get in the trigger, the door should open. And I walk through it, and of course, it stays open because we haven't yet told it to set the value of that parameter to false in order to close. But it's actually not too difficult to do that. So we have just enough time, I think, to wrap this up and add that functionality. So if we go back to our script, all right, so if we want the door to close when we leave the trigger, then onTriggerEnter has a brother, and his name is onTriggerExit. So if we do onTrigger, we'll see onTriggerExit listed here. So as you might expect, onTriggerEnter triggers when you enter the trigger, but then onTriggerExit when you leave the trigger. So we can actually just copy door animator set bool command here, and then paste it here, because the thing is going to be exactly the same, except we're going to change true to false. And then save. So now, when the player enters a trigger, we set open door to true. When they exit that same trigger, we set open door to false. And so now, provided that our trigger is set up the way we want it, so when I look at this trigger, I'm like, okay, I don't want the door to close until the player actually exits from that trigger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this go a little into the house. That seems reasonable. Don't want the door to hit them on the ass as they're going through it, you know, it would be awkward. So now, so this should work whether we walk all the way through the trigger or if we just step into it and back out of it. So we can try that. So we can try the case of, like, if I step up to it and it opens, then I back up out of it, it closes. All right. Now what in the case when I actually go all the way through, it closes. So the one thing I didn't cover in this class, the last thing was I was going to show you that on the question mark here that you could animate it, and instead of animating the transform, you could open the mesh renderer and animate the base color. And so in the same way you animated rotation, you can actually animate the color of something and have it change from its default color to a different color. So the point being, and that is another way of, like, drawing attention to something. Movement can do that, but a change of color is detected the same way that movement is. So you might try giving that the same, you know, an attempt. And don't forget, no class next week. But yeah, like, try out. You know, I encourage you to experiment with trying to animate simple things, but don't just stop at animating position, rotation, and scale. Look at some of the things that are available to you. And what's really powerful is you can even have your own custom script that has publicly available things that you can animate those. You can animate values that are on a script that's on the thing that you are animating. I know that you're like, what? But, like, when you look at a game object and you look at the components on it, you might try throwing an animation on it and seeing if you can animate those properties, those components that's on those things. Because, like, you know, you might be able to literally, like, change, like, the mesh renderer, you know, to have it be different shapes and stuff like that. You can do some pretty crazy things with animation. I think the other thing I didn't cover is, let's see, I think it's like if I have time. Yeah. All right. So, and as I mentioned, one of the things that you can do too is like this button adds keyframes, but this button adds something called an event. And the event doesn't show up here. It's on the timeline, but it's here. And if you click it, you can actually set a function that is going to call when it gets to that point. And so that's a little bit advanced, like I said. You could have ChatGPT explain it to you. I may show the intermediate class how to do it and record a video of it. But the point is, that's the way that you can do things like trigger VFX and sound effects and things that aren't on this object, but that you can connect. And that's really, really powerful. Cool. Well, I'm sorry for stealing an extra 10 minutes of your time. And I hope this didn't go too fast for you. But definitely practice some of the things you've seen here. And if you wind up having any trouble, don't hesitate poking me on Discord and saying, like, I was trying to do this, it didn't work. Here's my Unity project. Can you take a look at it? I'm always glad to do that. So, cool.